Well, I wrote things down because I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So excuse the reading glasses. Mark Twain once said, "The fear of death follows from the fear of life. The man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time." Scott was that man that lived fully. Scott was all about filling each day with something you always wanted to do or something you loved to do. Many people make bucket lists, but Scott was the one that actually checked things off in his bucket list. Scott's bucket list included things like hiking out in the wilderness with his brothers and his uncle, taking Cole in his Boy Scout troop to Hawaii, scuba diving and becoming a scuba instructor, starting a fraternity at San Diego State, and driving across and visiting about every state in the country. You know, I like to think that my family, Cindy, Kristen, Therese, Chelsea, and I, had a part in fulfilling his dream of visiting every state. You see, I was in the military, and as many people know, military families travel, or we move, a lot. And with each permanent change of station, or PCS, we saw it as another move and another inconvenience. But Scott saw it as another adventure, because as soon as we got our orders, Scott was planning his next trip and visit. As a matter of fact, Scott helped us move across the country twice. Once going and once coming back. I would drive the minivan with our 2- and 4-year-old at the time. He would drive my car with Cindy and our 3-month-old at the time. I'll never forget when we drove from California to Florida and we stopped in New Orleans to rest. Of course, while in New Orleans, Scott said, "Hey man, we have to go to Bourbon Street." So while Cindy and the 3 girls stayed in the hotel, Scott and I visited Bourbon Street. What an adventure that was. Let's just say I'm glad Cindy and the girls stayed in the hotel. But that was Scott. Adventure was his middle name. With each PCS and whichever new state we moved to, Scott would pack Susie, Cole, and Jordan in his RV for their next adventure. Scott had a giant sticker on the side of his RV, and he was able to add several states with each of our PCSs. It was always a blast to have the Chodorows visit us. The other day, Cindy reminded me, while the Chodorows visit us in Colorado, Scott had a Colorado bucket list. The list went a little like this. Number 1, see snow actually fall out of the sky. Check. Number 2, have a white Christmas. Check. Number 3, build an igloo. Not a snowman like normal people, but an igloo. He checked that twice. Twice because Scott built a huge igloo in our backyard, big enough for he and Cole to climb in for pictures. Of course, typical Scott, one was not enough, so he built one in our front yard, near our driveway entrance. Well, it was needed first until the igloo basically created a dam in front of our driveway, so when the snow would melt during the day, it would freeze at night, and it was always a challenge getting into the garage trying to drive across the pond that was frozen in our front yard. I think that igloo stuck around the house till about springtime. Number 4, he wanted to shovel snow. That was an easy one because I was more than happy to let someone else shovel my driveway. Check. Number 5, make a snow angel. Check. I might add that was probably the biggest snow angel in the history of mankind. Now number 6, and the final Colorado bucket list, was he wanted to help someone push their car through the snow. How odd as that sounds, that was Scott. Always looking for an adventure, and if it meant helping someone, all the better. Fortunately, my neighbor across the street was having problems getting the car into their driveway, so without hesitation, Scott ran out of our driveway, our garage, to run for help. Pushing a car through the snow and ice. Check. You see, pushing the neighbor's car through the snow and ice exemplifies the kind of person that Scott was. Thoughtful and always wanting to help. Whether it was helping with a project around the house, helping mom and dad set up for the Charger tailgate parties when Susie was cheering with the Chargers, helping me drive back from Florida to California. Yes, back across the country. This time it was just 2 of us. Me in my car, Scott in my minivan. Again, another adventure for Scott. On that trip, Scott was my guardian angel. Back then, there weren't any cell phones, so we had to use these little two-way radios to communicate with one another. As he followed me, he could tell when I was getting sleepy because I started to swerve side to side on the road. So Scott would get on the radio and start telling me jokes to keep me awake. I would key the mic after each joke to let him know and let him hear me laugh to let him know that I was awake. He always thought that was funny that I would let him hear, that I had to let him hear me laugh. The other day he would keep me awake because the other way he would try to keep me awake is he wanted to see just how far the minivan would go before it ran out of gas. He wanted to check to see if the computer on the van was accurate to determine how many miles were left in the gas tank. Now, only Scott would want to test that. But that was Scott, always looking for something to do for fun and the adventure. You know, as I tell these stories, I recall when Cindy and I first met Scott. He was so over the top and bigger than life. He was this tall, thin, good-looking male cheerleader from San Diego State dating our little Susie, and we wondered, how will he fit into the family? Well, before we knew it, Scott, our brother-in-law, 20 years ago, and there couldn't have been a better fit in the family. He was our honorary Filipino. As a matter of fact, he made quite the splash with the family in the Philippines when Scott, Susie, Mom, and Dad went to the Philippines for vacation. He was known as the Cabanting Puti, which stands for giant white guy. You see, Scott was not our brother-in-law. He was now my, Cindy's, and Maria's brother. And he was Kristen, Therese, Chelsea, and Bobby's Uncle Toddy. I soon came to learn whenever we got together with our brother, you could count on two things with Scott: comedy and cooking. He loved to laugh and he loved stand-up comics. Scott would imitate comedians I never heard of, some rated G, some rated R+. I remember one day I was driving with Scott and Cole, and they were quoting segments of Brian Regan's stand-up routine. And I was laughing so hard that I had to pull over because I was afraid I was going to crash. Scott burned a copy of that CD of Brian Regan that I still keep in my car today. And you can be sure that the next time I play it, I will see him laughing next to me with that laugh and snort that only Scott could do. Now, when Scott wasn't watching the comedy channel, he was watching the cooking channel. And I'm glad he did, because we always benefited from Scott's cooking. Whether it was his awesome chocolate cookies, his giant pancakes, his homemade itsits, aka chocolate-covered ice cream cookies. All that was good, but to me, no one, and I mean no one, could top Scott's homemade tacos. Every year we would come home for summer vacation, and one thing I could look forward to was Uncle Scott's tacos. Who knew the best Mexican tacos in Southern California would come from a Jewish boy from Calabasas? These glimpses of all the neat things Scott did is just awesome. But it's just who Scott was as a person that made him special. He loved our family like we were blood. He was always willing to help whenever anyone needed help. But probably most endearing was Scott was always concerned about how we are doing. About a month ago, Cindy spoke to Scott on the phone. Cindy was so excited to hear his voice as he sounded like the good old Scott, full of life. But Cindy was fighting a flu, and in typical Scott fashion, he was more concerned about her flu while on the call. Meanwhile, he was dealing with his condition. But that was Scott, always thinking about others. That is why we love and why we will miss him, but he will never be forgotten. A 19th century novelist named George Eliot said, "Our dead are never dead to us until we have forgotten them." Looking around in this gym today, I feel pretty sure that Scott will never be forgotten. I wish there was a Chodorow auditorium or a Chodorow gym or a Chodorow room here at Torrey Pines High School so he can forever be memorialized. But I believe Scott's legacy will live on for decades to come through the memories by his family, but also through his students. 30 plus years from now, all you young people in here today will remember Scott, aka Coach C, aka Mr. C, because as you all reunite for your reunions every 5 or 10 years, you will remember and reminisce those teachers like Scott that made your high school experience that more fun or great. You will tell stories to your children about that teacher in high school that made an impact on your life. With each thought about Scott, with each story, with each mention of his name, Scott will live on. So our family thanks you for being here today and for remembering